Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister, for your attendance for our conference and for your remarks. And I know that he has a busy schedule. He had 2 breakfasts so far and a short lunch with us, and I have no idea how many dinner commitments he has. So thank you very much for agreeing to accept a few questions from us. And please, if you have questions, please raise your hand, identify yourself, and if we can keep the questions as short as possible, concise, we can have as much questions. Let's start from here.
I'm Oya Bain with the Assembly of Turkish American Associations. Thank you. It was a very, very excellent speech. We are all very motivated. My question is, what is the timeline for the TTIP between the US and the EU? And do you see how much will it take? The Trans-Pacific issue is taking a long time. I think US's concentration is moving towards the Pacific much more. So what is your estimate of the TTIP project?
Good question. I mean, that probably should be addressed to either Europeans or Americans, but I have no idea. I mean, whatever I say would be just a guess, but one would think that the process is underway, and one would think that it would be concluded at worst case scenario during the next term, next presidential term. But I can't really make a call on that. But regardless of when it's concluded, we do not want to be left out of it. That would be extremely unfair. And, you know, I understand the US administration concerns about Congress, etc. But business community has to, you know, stand strong on this. And more importantly, we have to do our own homework. We have to convince that this is a good deal. I think it's a good deal. It will be a good deal in terms of job creation, in terms of more trade and more investment. And that's what the United States represents. That's where the United States always has been. I mean, so it doesn't, regardless of what happens, you know, when it happens, we would like to have an enhanced deal with EU, which essentially means upgrading the deal we have, which is simpler. If we can achieve that, I think it would be the best way, you know, the simplest sort of entry strategy into the TITP when it happens.
Thank you very much. Meryem.
Hello, my name is Meryem. I'm coming from Turkey, Istanbul, from Daily Sabah. Thank you very much for your speech and presentation. My question will be about on energy, power, and economic ties balancing between Israel, Turkey, and Iran. It was said that Israel isolated itself because of its opposition to the Iran nuclear deal and ongoing tensions with Turkey. However, recently, escalating tensions between Russia and Iran, Israel had transformed to a potential partner for Turkey, despite all ongoing irreconcilable issues such as what's happening in Gaza Strip now. My question is, what will be Turkey's stance if Iran, firstly, if Iran turns to a totally integrated to the international system, and secondly, what kind of player will Israel be if this happens? Thank you.
Well, thank you. We would welcome Iran as, you know, part of international system. We would benefit most, assuming Iran's play by rules, because we're neighbors. And we have the largest manufacturing base between, you know, if you draw a line, Germany to Italy, all the way to China, I think Turkey would be, probably would be the largest manufacturing base. So in that neighborhood, we are more competitive, and we would benefit most from Iran, you know, essentially becoming part of a global system and opening up and prospering, etc. So that would be welcome. Now, as far as Turkey-Israel relations are concerned, there has been some effort to fix the problems we had. and there is significant progress. And we do hope that ultimately, we'll reach an agreement. I think it would be in the interest of Turkey and international community to do so. It's really, the linkage with gas, is there, but I would say even before, let's say, this latest fallout from Russia or spat with Russia, I think there were efforts to mend fences with Israel. So I wouldn't really just reduce it to the gas issue. But of course, we have to diversify, and we cannot rely on just one supplier in a big way in terms of energy. That would be too much of a risk. We don't think that Russia or Iran or any other country will cut supply. I don't think that's likely. But regardless, I think it always makes sense to have diversification. And that's why I think it's important to tap Iraqi gas, gas from other parts of the world. We're building Tanap. As you know, there is a pipeline project for gas between Turkey and Azerbaijan, where Turkmeni gas could also be connected. Again, we're looking at LNG options, building capacity. We're looking at building storage. So energy is a big part of, obviously, that regional strategy or politics. And we are a big consumer, as well as we are a major energy supply corridor. I always tell my European counterparts that if they're genuinely interested in a vibrant EU economy, that they should allow Turkey in, because Europe is losing ground, and Turkey would help lift EU in global big picture macro. If they want dialogue between civilizations, they certainly should bring Turkey in to show that the path of democracy, rule of law, is much more preferable, much better than the path of destruction and terror and sectarian strife. Also, energy is a big component, because I think much of the energy resources lie in eastern Turkey, and therefore Turkey is key to energy supply security to European Union. So there are many, many reasons why EU needs us and we need EU. So really, it's much broader picture than just gas deal with, or the prospective gas deal between Turkey and any other country in the region. It hasn't worked out the way we wished. We wanted a region, Middle East neighborhood, to be more stable, more democratic, more open, and more prosperous. That would have been in our interest, absolutely. But it hasn't worked out that way. Let's hope that it does. And if it does, of course, again, we'll be there to play a constructive role.
Let's have two more questions very quick at the back. Yes. Yes.
Julia Savchenko, Voice of America. I'm just wondering what your assessment is of the impact that Russian sanctions are going to play in Turkey, and how it is going to affect your forecast and Turkish economy in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Our forecasts, which I didn't provide much short-term data forecast, and I could do it, that would have been classic, saying we've done so well last year and we're going to do this. Instead, I focused on more structural adjustment, but let me elaborate on that. Even prior to the latest, as I said, problems with Russia, Russia-Turkey trade was falling in tune of 30–40% per year. That was due to Russia's own economic problems, because Russian currency lost significant ground, and fewer people were traveling, fewer goods were being purchased from Turkey, fewer contracts were being awarded. So already the trade of services and goods were down substantially. Now, if you look at 2016, we think as a base case scenario, based on what Russia has already decided, that the fallout from this conflict with Russia is likely to be, as a base case scenario, about $3.1 billion. There are always different scenarios. It's a base case scenario. $3.1 billion, Turkish GDP is, close to, for this year, possibly, I don't have the full number, but somewhere between $700 to $800 billion. So it's very tiny, relative to GDP. So the fallout from Russian sanctions is likely to be insignificant. Furthermore, the goods that we sell to Russia are sellable to anywhere else, meaning we can supply it to other markets. And no other country can cover Russian demand in such a quick fashion. So they buy from somewhere else, we sell it to somewhere else. So I don't see a major fallout. So even that $3.1 billion, as I said, is a base case scenario. The damage might be even more contained, and therefore our projections, which will soon come up, meaning on hopefully next Monday, I should be able to unveil our 3-year economic program with all the forecasts as well as 2016 budget. It will show that the impact will be tolerable. Turkish current account deficit should continue to narrow on the back of lower oil prices. That is such a dramatic impact. Turkey is one of the biggest beneficiary of low oil prices, along with India. Alalım.
Thank you. Rahim Rashidi with Kurdistan TV. What do you think of the Kurdish future on the Middle East? And in your opinion, what are differences supporting KRG and Kurdish territory in Syria or Rojava? Thank you.
خودش ترازی به کرمانجی زنه گلک سپاس زور سپاس اجی کرده ترکیه ما Well, as a Kurd, as a Turkish citizen, of course, this is an important question. Europeans fought 100 years, a war that lasted for 100 years. And then they fought First World War, and then they fought the Second World War. Millions and millions of people lost their lives. Now you're talking about 28 nations, maybe many more ethnic groups, many more religious groups or whatever, different sects. And after all that carnage and wars and stuff, Europe got together, formed a union, eliminated borders, has a flag, a parliament, single currency, now a banking union. The problem is, of course, right now there is so much dust in the air, there's so much conflict, there is so much tragedies going on. It's very difficult to foresee anything along these lines. But the best future for Turkish Kurds would be, from my own perspective, the best future for me would be a more democratic, a more tolerant, a more prosperous Turkey that is part of European family. And that would be the best for Kurds and Turks and everybody else. Sadly, with all this violence, right now, let me give you one more point. If you go to Iraq, I don't know much about Iran, but if you go to Iraq, if you draw a line, let's say below Kirkuk or Mosul, there are no Kurds. If you go to Syria, except the stretch along the Turkish border, including Rojava, there are no Kurds in Damascus. There are in other places. In Turkey, the biggest Kurdish city is not Diyarbakir. In fact, the world's biggest Kurdish city is Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir. My wife is a Turk. So Turks and Kurds in Turkey are inseparable. So the future is, as I said, more prosperous, more democratic Turkey. And that's exactly what painfully we've been trying to achieve over the last decade or so. When I left my village, when I left my hometown to study in Ankara, later on to study in the UK, to work in the US and in the UK, if somebody had told me that Turkey would change so much in this, in terms of basically, getting rid of the old policies, providing fundamental rights and freedoms to all the ethnic groups, including Kurds, I would have been very suspicious. I mean, I wouldn't have subscribed to such a perspective. Today, if whatever Hispanic, let's say, ethnic group in the United States enjoy in terms of culture, religious, political, in terms of, let's say, whatever comes to your mind, as a Kurd or Kurds in Turkey enjoy the same thing. The only barrier to a better coexistence is violence. We started the so-called reconciliation process a couple of years ago. And it had real chance to work. It did. And suddenly there was optimism. I represented a town during that period called Batman. It's in the southeast part of Turkey. That's where I was born. And it was a booming town. Exports have gone up by about 80 folds. I'm not exaggerating. Organized industrial zone was full of factories. Hope. But today, with the violence again back at play, it's a very different story. So the only way forward, we're not naive to think that we can solve problem by just killing terrorists. That's not a solution. Of course, we have to have public order on the streets and in the region. But the way forward is, as I said, a more democratic and boosting further fundamental rights and freedoms. I think had the Middle Eastern sort of developments not been the way, had Syria issue hasn't evolved the way it has evolved today, we might have been at a different stage or talking about different things. We have no choice right now to deal with the violence because no democracy can tolerate violence. When there is violence, you cannot use your even basic rights, which is the case right now. So we have to deal with that, we have to contain that. But we are aware that it takes much more than that. And that's why we are seeking a constitutional reform. That's why we are seeking, we're trying to make Turkey a more prosperous place, addressing the regional development gaps. So, bottom line is, I think the future would be bright for Kurds if they subscribed to a model that takes democracy, rule of law as the basis, rather than just simply resort to violence to achieve, this or that aim. In Iraq, everybody's talking about united Iraq. Everybody's talking about ultimately, nobody's talking about partition of Syria or partition of Iraq or partition of Iran or partition of any other country right now. I think the region, had enough of sectarian strife, violence, and ethnic violence. And the solution is not more violence. The solution is less of that and more dialogue and obviously more reforms. But PKK, which is on the United States terrorist list, sadly failed to make use of the opportunity that we have extended, that we have done. Instead, they built more, they accumulated more ammunition, recruited more militants, and now they're trying to occupy parts of city centers by, digging. I mean, it doesn't really, it doesn't bode well. So we're going to have to deal with this episode. But the work on Turkey's democratization, the work on making sure that everybody is first-class citizen and enjoy, a fair share of prosperity that is created, is continuing. As occurred today, my parents were illiterate. They were illiterate. They couldn't speak a word in Turkish. They were farmers. Today, I'm the deputy prime minister of the same country. So nobody can tell me that, in the past, there were mistakes. But today, you can't say that the Kurdish rights are not provided for. We may not be perfect, but the channel to correct this is not more violence, is actually at the parliament discussing. So thank you very much for your question. I mean,
Hakan, one more question.
Okay, maybe last one.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
My name is Hisham Al-Talib. I am from IIIT International Institute of Islamic Thought. Turkey has been very generous in hosting over 2 million Syrian refugees. Do you have any plan in integrating this to over 2 million people into the economic prosperity that you were explaining in the last hour? In other words, how can you convert from a hurdle into a stepping stone with these 2 million people, like Germany is trying to do? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. To give you exact figures, we almost have 2.5 million Syrian and Iraqi refugees. And they're more than welcome. They're not a burden. We're doing what is right, was what, a human being would do, what a good neighbor would do. The open door policy continues. We ideally would like to see Syrian issue resolved and people obviously go back to their normal life. But we also realize that even if that happens, not everybody will go back to their old normal life. So the situation is fluid, and that's why we haven't yet taken steps along those way. But ultimately, we see, the scope for that. I mean, we're aware of that. Today, if we were to, hypothetically speaking, provide, more permanent, let's say, status, that could attract even more, many more. So, there is a challenge. I mean, I'm just being very open here. So we'll see. But we don't see them as a liability. We are equally aware that they could be an asset. But of course, there are complications. With very limited so far, almost none, very limited international help, we've been able to cater for the needs of our guests, we would say. And there's been very few complaints. My constituency today is Gaziantep. And in Gaziantep alone, we have 340,000 Syrian refugees. So many of them informally actually are integrated. But as I said, we'll have to see how things evolve before we take, future steps. I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer all of your questions, but I hope it's been useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Minister, and please join me to thank Mr. Deputy Prime Minister Mehmet Simsek.